Namaskar, this is Firstpost and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. Day one of any summit is usually about handshakes and smiles, getting to know each other, testing the waters. It is usually a curtain raiser for the action-packed final day. But India's G20 presidency has started with a bang. Day one came with some surprises like the New Delhi declaration that was forged after days of deliberation and some historic moments like Africa's inclusion in this grouping. We'll tell you what that means. Also an exclusive conversation with President Lula da Silva. His country, Brazil, will take over the presidency from India. We talk about what this means for the global south. Also, what does a successful G20 mean for brand India? Has the country officially declared itself a major power? All this and more is coming up in that conversation with the Brazilian president. But first, the headlines. Nawaz Sharif likely to return to Pakistan next month. The former Prime Minister has been in self-imposed exile in London for almost 4 years. Speculation about the PMLN chief's return has been rife for months now. Sharif was convicted for corruption. He was allowed to travel abroad on medical grounds. UK police arrest a terror suspect who escaped from a London prison. 21-year-old Daniel Khalif fled on Wednesday. He allegedly escaped by clinging onto the bottom of a delivery van. The former soldier is accused of leaving fake bombs at a military base. Iran arrests 6 people for planning riots on Masha Amini's death anniversary. That's what they've called it, riots. Amini died on the 16th of September last year. Her death in custody triggered nationwide protests over the hijab. Hundreds have been killed and thousands arrested in these protests in Iran. Elon Musk-owned X sues the state of California. This is over a law for social media companies. It asks firms to publicly post their policies on hate speech and disinformation. X, formerly known as Twitter, says it violates the right to free speech. And Neymar overtakes Pele, becomes Brazil's all-time top scorer. His 2 goals against Bolivia take him past Pele's record. Neymar now has 79 goals to Pele's 77. It was the big day today. It's all that we've been talking about for months. Day one of the G20 Summit. If you've been tracking the news, you know that the hype is real. India took over the G20 presidency in Bali last December. So the last 9 months have come down to this moment. The Leaders' Summit here in New Delhi. It kicked off this morning at the Bharat Mandapam, a newly constructed sprawling building in the heart of the national capital. The place is buzzing with action right now. World leaders, diplomats, journalists, the who's who of the world, all gathered at the center of New Delhi. It is what many call the Met Gala of diplomacy. I know diplomacy can be boring, but the G20 summit is not just about policy discussions. Sure, that is important, but it's also about the grandeur, the opulence, diplomatic finesse, and international flair. The summit will go on for 2 days, today and tomorrow. So like I said, today was day one. It started with the welcome of world leaders. Like any host, Prime Minister Modi arrived first. He was there to greet the leaders to the summit. There were some laughs, hugs, even banter that was shared. The Indian Prime Minister welcomed world leaders in front of this backdrop, the Konark Wheel in Odisha. It was built during the 13th century. The wheel with 24 spokes features India's national flag as well. It serves as a symbol for the wheel of democracy. It's similar to the Ashok Chakra. So a perfect backdrop for India's welcome handshake. The Prime Minister welcomed 36 world leaders, leaders of G20 nations, leaders of nations that India invited to the summit. The United Nations Secretary General, the World Bank President, the MD of the International Monetary Fund. Once the welcome was done, it was time to get down to business. Prime Minister Modi kick-started the day with a welcome speech.
21वीं सदी का यह समय पूरी दुनिया को नई दिशा दिखाने वाला और नई दिशा देने वाला एक महत्वपूर्ण समय है। ये वो समय है जब बरसों पुरानी चुनौतियां हमसे नए समाधान मांग रही हैं और इसलिए हमें ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक अप्रोच के साथ अपने हर दायित्व को निभाते हुए ही आगे बढ़ना है।
It's the placard ahead of him that got everyone's attention. It said Bharat instead of India. Now this comes amid speculation of a name change for the country. Both names, Bharat and India, find mention in the Indian Constitution, but the use of Bharat has caused some debate, a lot of discussion now. Is India looking at a name change? Nothing has been said officially. So it's all speculation right now, which brings us to the other significant moment in this session, this historic hug. It's one for the history books. The summit witnessed a landmark decision. The G20 has become the G21 now. But more on that later. The inclusion of the African Union. We'll talk about that in detail. Let's, for now, focus on the first session of the G20 Summit. It was called One Earth. This is in line with India's G20 slogan, Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, which translates to the world is one family, one earth, one family, one future. That's the slogan. The first session was One Earth. As the name suggests, it largely focused on environmental issues.
आज G20 के प्रेसिडेंट के तौर पर भारत पूरी दुनिया का आह्वान करता है कि हम मिलकर सबसे पहले इस ग्लोबल ट्रस्ट डेफिसिट को एक विश्वास, एक भरोसे में बदलें। यह हम सभी के साथ मिलकर चलने का समय है।
Then came session 2, One Family. The last session for day one of the G20 Summit, that was One Family. Today there were two sessions. And a big moment for India's presidency. The G20 adopted the Delhi Declaration.
मैं इस डिक्लेरेशन को एडॉप्ट करने की घोषणा करता हूं।
This is a big win for New Delhi. We'll discuss in detail what this means for India and what it took to forge the consensus. That's coming later on the show. But all in all, it was a very productive day for G20 and the Indian Prime Minister agreed. But the day was not just about these two sessions. A lot more was going on the sidelines. Bilaterals, announcement of alliances, historic infrastructure deals, photo ops, and some good old selfies. Looks like even world leaders cannot resist the camera. The day ended with a gala dinner at the Bharat Mandapam. It was hosted by India's President Draupadi Murmu. The guest list includes 170 people. And this list has heads of state, Indian chief ministers, cabinet and state ministers, and other notable guests. There is a 3-hour special concert for leaders as well, a musical journey highlighting India's culture. Then they were treated to a unique dining experience, one that highlights India's rich culture and heritage. Millet, of course, was the hero in the menu. This is the International Year of Millets, and India wants to become the global hub for this food item, millets. They call it Shri Ann. And there were millet leaf crisps, millet pudding, Indian breads like Mumbai Pav, curry leaf tossed Kerala red rice. Basically a menu that highlights India's diversity, culinary diversity as well. So the first day concluded with this dinner. There's still day 2 to go, that's tomorrow, and another day of hectic diplomacy in the Indian capital. We'll be bringing you all the details and the updates right here on First Post and on a special edition of Vantage that's also coming tomorrow night. All in all, this is India's moment. New Delhi's coming out on the global stage, as it were, and we have been here for some time, but this was India's occasion to shine. So the hype was real, and so was the fear of deadlock. We have been asking this question for a while now, probably the most important yet boring question about the G20. Will there be a joint statement? Well, we have the answer now. There is a joint statement. The New Delhi Declaration has been adopted. Each and every G20 member has agreed to this. I'm sure Indian diplomats are breathing a sigh of relief. You see, most of the G20 meetings this year did not have a joint statement. Not the foreign ministers, not the finance ministers, not the trade ministers. But when it mattered, India got the job done. How it happened is also interesting. The G20 Sherpas or envoys had been working for days. They were stuck on one subject, Ukraine. The Western countries wanted tough language against Russia. Moscow and Beijing disagreed, hence the deadlock. Now, for a while, it looked like no joint statement would emerge. And it could have been embarrassing. Because every G20 summit has had a joint statement. Imagine if India ended that streak. So the pressure was real. Around noon today, some positive reports emerged. There was talk of a breakthrough. And then before the second G20 session came a surprise announcement. Take a look.
अभी एक खुशखबरी मिली है हमारी टीम्स के हार्डवर्क से और आप सभी के सहयोग से नई दिल्ली G20 लीडर्स समिट डिक्लेरेशन पर सहमति बनी है। मैं इस डिक्लेरेशन को एडॉप्ट करने की घोषणा करता हूं।
Nobody was expecting the joint statement today. Tomorrow maybe, but definitely not today. But as far as surprises go, it was a pleasant one. So what exactly does this declaration say? It is 34 pages long. It covers dozens of issues like the war in Ukraine, sustainable development goals, climate financing, cryptocurrency, tackling terrorism, a whole host of issues. On Ukraine, the text is quite interesting. Here is what it says. Concerning the war in Ukraine, while recalling the discussion in Bali, we reiterated our national positions. All states must act in a manner consistent with the purposes and principles of the UN Charter in its entirety. All states must refrain from the threat or use of force to seek territorial acquisition against the territorial integrity and sovereignty or political independence of any state. It's a bit different from the Bali statement. That one mentioned Russian aggression. It also mentioned the United Nations resolution which asked Russia to withdraw from Ukraine. The Delhi Declaration does not. Instead, it adds a statement which Prime Minister Modi said to Putin. Today's era must not be of war. At first reading, the difference is clear. The Bali statement is much sharper on Ukraine. India's foreign minister was asked about this difference. Listen to his response.
I would only say Bali was Bali and New Delhi is New Delhi. I mean, Bali was a year ago. The context, the situation was different. Many things have happened since then. In fact, if you see in the geopolitical segment of the leaders' declaration, there are in totality 8 paragraphs, 7 of which actually focus on the Ukraine issue, and many of them highlight problems which are of great contemporary significance.
Bali was Bali, Delhi is Delhi. India's G20 Sherpa has highlighted 5 major points from the declaration: strong and sustainable growth, accelerating progress on sustainable development goals, green development, multilateral institutions for the 21st century, and reviving global cooperation. Now, these are mostly socio-economic issues. Of course, there's politics too, like countering terrorism. The Delhi Declaration commits to supporting the FATF, that's the Financial Action Task Force. It's the same watchdog that put Pakistan on its grey list. Another issue is cryptocurrency. The G20 leaders have called for regulating, supervising and overseeing the crypto market. The finance minister will take this issue forward. And finally, we have climate change. The Delhi Declaration acknowledges the impact of climate change, especially on least developed countries and islands. It urges all countries to follow the Paris Agreement. And what does it say? That global warming should be limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. It looks impossible right now, 1.5 degrees. Many experts say 2 degrees would be a blessing. So the G20 leaders have agreed to take stock. The declaration urges all countries to revisit and strengthen their emission targets. But is the Delhi Declaration better than others on climate action? Well, India's G20 Sherpa says yes, it is. He has highlighted 3 reasons why. Listen to this.
For the first time, G20 has talked about tripling of renewable energy capacity by 2030 globally. Secondly, this is the first document which talks about, which has very huge focus on fossil subsidies. And thirdly, this is the first time that there is a huge focus on billions to trillions of dollars in climate finance.
Those are the big takeaways from today. We had 2 sessions in the evening, one Earth and one family. We have another session tomorrow, which is one future. I know there's a lot of euphoria around the declaration, but let's not forget one thing. The joint statement is just one part of G20. A lot of work happens before it. In fact, I have some numbers for you. India has hosted more than 220 G20 meetings, 220 meetings. 17 of them were minister-level meetings. And where did they happen? Across the country, across India, around 60 cities, 60, hosted various G20 meetings in the past few months. And that was before today. Right now, around 43 world leaders are in New Delhi. These are heads of state plus heads of global agencies like the UN and the World Bank. There are 25,000 delegates from more than 115 countries in India's national capital, so the participation is very high and the outcomes are quite impressive. India has released around 112 outcome documents. That's around 2 to 5 times higher than the past G20 presidencies. These are all very impressive numbers. They show 3 important values: diversity, consultation, and delivery. So those are the big takeaways from the G20 sessions. But on the sidelines, there was more diplomacy. Prime Minister Modi had 3 bilaterals today with UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, with Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, and with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni. He also attended 2 important multilateral events. One was a global biofuel alliance. The US, Bangladesh, and the UAE are also part of it. It seeks to increase ethanol blending in petrol up to 20%. Some quick background. Ethanol is not a fossil fuel. It is derived from fermented sugar. If you mix ethanol with petrol, you can reduce the consumption of fossil fuel. That is the plan here, to take ethanol blending up to 20%. Now to the second multilateral event that he attended, a cross-continental economic corridor. They're calling it the New Spice Route. It will link 3 important regions: Europe, West Asia, and India. I know you will have questions. How will this be done? Which countries are part of it? The network will include railway lines and ships. We told you about this yesterday. As for the partners, there are 5. From West Asia, we have Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Israel, and Jordan. From the West, we have the European Union. And from the East, we have India. The United States is also a part of this project, but they will not be linked by this corridor. We'll discuss it in detail. But first, listen to Prime Minister Modi and President Biden.
हमारा मानना है कि कनेक्टिविटी विभिन्न देशों के बीच आपसी व्यापार ही नहीं, आपसी विश्वास भी बढ़ाने का स्रोत है। कनेक्टिविटी इनिशिएटिव्स को प्रमोट करते हुए कुछ मूलभूत सिद्धांतों का सुनिश्चित किया जाना महत्वपूर्ण है, जैसे अंतर्राष्ट्रीय नॉर्म्स, रूल्स तथा लॉज का पालन, सभी देशों की संप्रभुता और क्षेत्रीय अखंडता का सम्मान.
As a key part of this corridor, we're going to invest in ships and rail that extends from India all the way to Europe, connected by the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel. Bridging ports across 2 continents, unlocking endless opportunities, including making it far easier to trade, export clean energy, expand access to reliable, clean electricity, lay cables that will connect communities and secure a stable internet.
The idea is to make shipping cheaper, to expand trade in these regions. But you can't ignore the political angle. This corridor sounds a lot like China's Belt and Road Initiative. And that's not an accident. These countries are offering an alternative to China's BRI. Beijing's project is considered a debt trap. It also lacks transparency, which is why Prime Minister Modi emphasized on both these things. He said this new corridor will be transparent and will respect sovereignty. If you look at the timing, it's perfect. BRI projects are losing steam. Countries like Italy are leaving. So now is the time. And look at how broad this partnership is. It's got Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Israel. The key is to sell this vision to the global south to convince them that it's better than the BRI. So day one of the G20 has in fact exceeded expectations. We got a joint statement, we got 3 bilateral meetings, we got 2 successful sessions and a strategic agreement that could free the global south from China's debt traps. I would say that's job done. But years later, we may not remember much of this, of these bilaterals or statements. But we will remember milestones. Not every summit is lucky enough to have milestones like these, but New Delhi was. And that moment came very early in the day today. The G20 leaders took their seats inside the summit hall. Prime Minister Modi gave his opening remarks. He invited the African Union's president to join the round table. Look at this.
आगे की कार्रवाई शुरू करने से पहले मैं अफ्रीकन यूनियन के अध्यक्ष को G20 के स्थायी सदस्य के रूप में अपना स्थान ग्रहण करने के लिए आमंत्रित करता हूं। एक्सेलेंसी,
I must say it was very dramatic and perhaps by design. Membership for the African Union was long overdue. We told you about this yesterday too. The continent makes up 17% of the world population, but until today, they had one member in the G20. All of Africa had one member. One member for 17% of the world population. India took the lead in correcting that, in lobbying for the African Union's inclusion. So the drama was necessary. Chances are these pictures will be etched in G20 history. The African Union president being escorted to the table, the new plaque being placed in front of him, the embrace before taking the seat, all of it was historic. And it's only fair that this happened under India's presidency. We have a lot of history with Africa, like the colonial experience, the freedom movements, and later on, our non-alignment during the Cold War. Today's events reaffirm that commitment, not just to Africa, but to the entire global south, the so-called developing world. This summit is a huge win on 2 counts. One, the ability to host such an event. We're talking about complicated logistics here, dozens of leaders, dozens of VVIP jets and motorcades. A lot can go wrong in such situations, but India has pulled it off. It's a huge learning curve for the country and for its people. And number 2, the definition of the India way. What does that mean? We know there is an American way. Meddle too much, preach a lot. We also know there is a Chinese way. Ignore opinions, force your will. But India has demonstrated that a third way is possible. The India way. It has 4 broad steps. Consult everyone. Focus on the positives. Minimize the differences and build consensus. It may sound like pretty basic stuff, but right now it is the need of the hour. You cannot end the war in Ukraine over 2 days in New Delhi. It's impossible. But here's what you can do. You can make progress on debt relief, review climate commitments, reform multilateral organizations and set sustainable goals. So India focused on these issues instead, on issues that affect millions of people across the world. It's a template that should be followed. Consider what happened last year. Indonesia was president of the G20. Everything was focused on Ukraine. Russia walked out when Western officials spoke. Western officials walked out when Russia spoke. And who does this help? Not Ukraine, certainly not millions of people in the global south. So India has tried to avoid such face-offs. It has tried to focus on deliverables, which is why this G20 has been a huge boost for brand India. New Delhi wanted to use this summit to cement its role as a major power, and so far it has gone to plan. The global south has got a voice. Africa got membership. And the joint statement was accepted. It's proof of India's new role in global affairs, that of a policy leader, not a follower. It's also a big win for the Prime Minister. Every leader uses foreign policy to cement their legacy. Everywhere in the world, Prime Minister Modi is no different. After taking office, he displayed keen interest in global politics. Around 10 years have passed since then. He's now a G20 veteran. Just think about it. Most of the current G20 leaders came to power after Prime Minister Modi, like Joe Biden, Emmanuel Macron, Fumio Kishida, Yoon Suk Yeol, Olaf Scholz, Rishi Sunak, all of them are relatively new leaders. Prime Minister Modi capitalized on that. He used his experience and India's clout to get things done. And if you think about it, this was not a normal G20. You did not have to be told that India was hosting it. You just had to walk on the streets. There were hundreds of banners, multiple advertisements, and of course, a lot of media interest. And why not? The decisions taken in the G20 affect people's life. So it's only fair that their voice is heard. Perhaps that will be the legacy of India's G20 presidency, focusing and listening to the people. Not just closed-door diplomacy, not just endless political bickering. A summit to actually make a difference. And now it's time for a Firstpost exclusive. India's presidency has set the tone for next year. Brazil will take over as the next G20 president tomorrow. And just a short while back, we sat down with the president of Brazil, Lula da Silva. He hailed India's G20 agenda. He said, India is teaching us a new way of people's participation in diplomacy. President Lula said, the Delhi Declaration shows that India will always be a power. He spoke his mind on the war in Ukraine, about Chinese President Xi Jinping's absence, whether Putin will attend next year's G20 summit in Brazil, and Indian movies. He happens to be a fan. Here's an excerpt from the conversation. Hello and welcome to this very special interview. With me is the President of Brazil, Mr. Lula da Silva. President da Silva, welcome to Firstpost.
Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here talking with the Indian TV viewer, and I hope that we're going to have a great interview.
We look forward to it, Mr. President. How's your visit to New Delhi going so far, and how has the first day of the G20 summit been for you?
Well, actually, this G20 is a G20 that is exceptionally very well organized. We had, I would say, a lot of work. I arrived last night, and today we had 2 sessions that were hard work, and we had some other parallel events that were also very important. We launched a commitment together with Prime Minister Modi and President Biden, with Argentina, with Indonesia, commitment to follow a biofuel policy that is very strong so that we can fight the greenhouse gas effect, so that we can diminish the use of oil and try to use biofuel. So that was very important, this initiative, this commitment that was assumed by all the presidents that participated together with Prime Minister Modi. And so I am convinced that we will come out of this meeting with some guidelines where the countries will, what would they have to do from here onwards, so that we can diminish the inequality between the peoples, inequality amongst the countries, so that the world could live in a better way, and above all, so that we can confront the climate issue with great responsibility. It's not a joke what's happening on with the climate change around the world. If someone still has doubts that the climate, nothing will happen with the climate, I can reassure you that the most certain thing that exists today is that we are lacking with responsibility when we deal with the climate change, and we're being the victim of the lack of attention of humanity. The rulers lacked responsibility in dealing in an effective way to avoid that the planet will warm up, that we will lose control of these floods, and there's nothing to do. We still have time. We have to take care of the planet. I believe that this meeting will give a very good guideline to all countries so that we can manage to put in practice a good policy so that we can take care with great care of our planet Earth, of their forests, of its water, so that we can live well.
Mr. President, it's very, very good to see a world leader like you speak so passionately about climate, and we hope to see more leaders put it at the center of their policy making. I understand that India has been also pushing for climate action that is just, that does justice to the whole world, developing and developed. We've had some 200 meetings over the past few months in 60 Indian cities. What do you make of the progress that has been made so far, and what do you make of India's agenda?
I think it was an extraordinary, the India agenda that they developed, and the promotion of 60 debates or more in different cities. In Brazil, many ministers came to these meetings. We had the health minister, we had the mines and energy minister from Brazil, we had the science and technology minister, the enormous amount, the labor minister came here, and the finance minister came to these meetings. So these hundreds of meetings that you involving thousands of people is a new way that India is teaching to us that it's not sufficient for the presidents of the countries to participate. It's necessary for us to involve the government as a whole, and that we should involve the people that should participate in the debate. We learned a lot. And since we're going to host next year the G20 in Brazil, we will take from India many teachings, and so that we can have a G20 meeting as productive as we had here in India.
One of the big headlines today is the Delhi Declaration. We understand that there is finally consensus. We've seen the draft of the declaration and all leaders have agreed. There was a fear that the war in Ukraine might hijack the agenda. And in the statements that followed since, it was said that Brazil, South Africa and Indonesia helped forge consensus. Can you tell us a little more about the conversation that went in and how did Brazil contribute?
Well, the G20 is a forum that was built because of the 2008 and 2009 global financial crisis. From there onwards, the G20 started to discuss many economic issues, and the Bretton Woods institutions were also started to be discussed, the World Bank, the IMF, in an attempt to try to improve the functioning of these multilateral institute. That's why we didn't want here in India, we would discuss the war between Ukraine and Russia. This is not the appropriate forum for that. On the 19th of September of this month, we will have the General Assembly of the UN, and that's the place for us to discuss the war. That's the place for us to try to discuss peace. That's the place for us to call Putin and Zelensky in a negotiation table, and because no one wants war. Everybody is against war. We want peace. So it's necessary for us to establish a conversation policy so that we can try to convince the two presidents for Russia and Ukraine that the war is not the solution for anything, and that the dialogue, the diplomacy, and a table of dialogue could help much more. From the beginning, Brazil has been saying that we do not want to participate in the war efforts. Brazil wants to participate in the peace effort. We want to try to negotiate, as also India thinks like that, China thinks like that, many other countries think like Brazil, and so that's why we believe that it's very important so that the war issue should not be included in the document, in the declaration from the G20. That's very important. Otherwise, people go to war and then we lose and waste time instead of discussing the problems that involve 9 billion inhabitants, the hunger that is affecting 735 million people, unemployment of millions of people, and we stay here discussing something that is not our top priority. And so I believe that it was very important, the decision that was made not to allow that the war would come into our declaration. The declaration is very serious-minded. It's a mandatory reading for all of us that participated in the G20, and I hope that it serves as a guideline, as a roadmap, so that we can, in Rio next year, to do something even better. Now we have to start to go to actual policies. Now we're going to go to a phase that G20 doesn't have to stay anymore just discussing and philosophy. And no, we have to take commitments to make things change, to do things. The climate change issue is very serious-minded. We have to do something about it. And Brazil is taking the commitment of reaching 2030 with zero deforestation. And we have already ended hunger in Brazil once in the past. And now we have 33 million that are in hunger once again. And so we're going to end the hunger in Brazil again. And to end with hunger in Brazil, we have to create jobs. The economy has to grow. The poor has to come into the national budget of the different countries. When the government starts building its budget to know how much money the government is going to spend, they have to include the poor in that budget, in government spending. The poor has to be included in the government budget because no one wants to include the poor. Now, in the moment that you put the poor in the budget, you start to diminish the poverty, because you know what happens when the poor receives a benefit. He receives a benefit, and he's not going to buy dollar. He's not going to keep that money. He's going to buy things. He's going to buy new clothes for his children. He's going to buy school material for the kids. So that means that the wheel of the economy starts working. This is what we're going to have to do from here onwards. We're going to have to make the economy move forward so that we can end with the inequality and with hunger in the planet Earth.
Would you say this consensus, in a way, is a win for New Delhi, and it establishes India as a bridging power in an increasingly divided world?
India will always be a power. It is a country that has a tremendous 1,000-year culture. It's a country that was already colonized, a country that managed to get its independence with the most extraordinary figure after Christ, which is Mahatma Gandhi. It's a country that has 1,400,000,000 inhabitants. It's a country that is the sixth largest economy of the world, a country that managed to build a cheap rocket and reach a part of the moon that not even the Russians managed, and the Americans managed to go to that part of the moon. So what happened here was the result of the competence of organization of the G20 that India organized as the host country. India is always a country that you have to take it very seriously, very respected country, and I will always say that because we came here and we established a strategic partnership between Brazil and India, and this partnership now needs to be improved so that the trade flow, foreign trade flow between Brazil and India should be the size of India and the size of Brazil. It should be very big, because we can do that. So we have the conditions to do. So what happened here was a victory of the organization and of the respectability that we all have for India.
At the BRICS summit, there was a picture of you along with the Indian Prime Minister that went viral. You were looking at a newspaper, and we were all very curious to know what was the conversation that you were having at that time.
I was congratulating the Prime Minister Modi for the conquest of reaching the space with a rocket, cheap rocket, and to manage to reach a place where 4 days before that, the Russians failed to reach the moon. So I think it was an extraordinary achievement with science and technology for India. So I was congratulating the Prime Minister, and he was very proud of the achievement.
And my final question, a lot of people have seen you making speeches at global forums. We've heard about your views on politics, your views on climate change, economy, but not many people know that you also watch movies from India. Do you want to tell our audience about the movie that you liked?
Yes. The last film that I watched from India is a film called Revolt, Rebellion, and Revolution. RRR. It's a 3-hour feature film, and it has very funny scenes. There is beautiful dance in the film, and there is a critique, a deep critique to the British control over India and conquering India. Sincerely, I believe that this film should have been a box office here in India, and I believe that it should be making success around the world, because everybody that talks to me, the first thing that I say is, have you watched the 3R film? Revolt, Rebellion, and Revolution. And so many times we see that the Indian film, and people don't even know that India has good movies, a good movie industry. Many times people are not aware of that movie industry, that they have good films from India. So sincerely, I enjoyed very much this film from India. The political side, I enjoyed also the dance, the joy that was shown in the film, even when the critique is done in a very humor. The critique is perfect, even using humor. So I congratulate to the directors of this film, to the artists, because it enchanted me.
So day one was successful, but a lot of that success was built on days of hard work and meetings. One of them happened last night. A bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and US President Biden. We reported this yesterday. The meeting was happening when our show was live, and now we have the details. Both Biden and Modi described the bilateral relations as quote-unquote strong and enduring. They also talked about shared values like democracy, human rights and pluralism. Beyond that, three things stand out in the statement. One is space collaboration. Biden congratulated Modi on Chandrayaan's success. The two countries are also working on a mission to the International Space Station, a manned mission. If these sound boring and simple, don't worry. Biden and Modi have got you covered. They discussed planetary defense missions as well, basically how to defend Earth from things like asteroids. The second issue was defense. Both leaders took stock of the deal struck in June. That's when Prime Minister Modi visited the United States. He had a state visit. One of the deals is between GE Aerospace and HAL, Hindustan Aeronauticals Limited. Together, they will make jet engines in India. The deal has been notified by the US Congress. Another agreement is for killer drones, the General Atomics MQ-9B Reaper. India is looking to buy 29 of them. The US President welcomed the latest purchase. There was also mention of a ship repair agreement. It was signed by the US Navy and Mazagon Dock shipbuilders. What does it say? It says American ships can be repaired at Mazagon. But the long-term goal is much bigger, to turn India into a hub for repairing forward-deployed ships and jets. The key is forward-deployed. We're talking about very important assets here, jets and ships that could be used if conflict breaks out. And finally, the third issue, cooperation on technology. US companies have invested millions in building new supply chains. There is also collaboration on telecom, more specifically 5G and 6G technology. All of this was expected, but a couple of things were not. For example, Ukraine. When Biden and Modi met in June, the statement mentioned Ukraine. It expressed deep concern on the issue. It also emphasized on sovereignty and territorial integrity, but this time Ukraine is missing. The joint statement does not mention the war at all. American media is too concerned about that, but they are concerned about something else as well. Apparently, they were not given access to the Biden-Modi meeting. They had to wait outside. No questions, no cameras. The US says they asked the Indian government to grant access. For whatever reason, New Delhi denied. Despite that, the bilateral seems to have been a success. We have a joint statement. We also saw the emergence of a new India-US plan to link Europe and India. He said not bad for a late-night bilateral. And now let's shift our focus to Africa. A rare and powerful earthquake has struck Morocco. This is the nation's deadliest earthquake in decades. It was of the magnitude was 6.8 on the Richter scale. More than 1,000 people have been killed. Over 1,200 are said to be injured. Entire buildings have collapsed and historical sites have been heavily damaged. As we speak, rescue operations are still underway. Many victims are still missing or stuck in remote mountainous villages. Here's a report.
This was the moment when the devastating earthquake hit Morocco. It happened on Friday night. People were woken by the quake. They ran into the streets in terror and disbelief. This video is CCTV footage from Marrakesh, a city of about 800,000, showing the exact moment when the 6.8 magnitude earthquake struck, with its epicenter located 72 kilometers off the city.
The house rocked aggressively. Everyone was scared, and I was shocked, and I didn't understand what was happening. I thought it was only my house that was moving because it's fragile and old. I heard people screaming. Everyone went out of their houses. The street is full of people and women screaming. That's what happened. Even now, people can't go back home because they are still afraid because of the last hit. The first hit, we did not feel it.
This is the African nation's deadliest earthquake in decades. Over 1,000 people have been killed and over 1,200 are injured. Hundreds are in critical condition. Many are still missing or stuck in remote mountainous villages that were hit the hardest. These 6 provinces were the worst hit: Al-Haus, Marrakesh, Ouarzazate, Ezilal, Shishawa and Terudent. They all house ancient cities. The quake toppled buildings and walls made from stone and masonry crumbled like a house of cards. They were not designed to withstand such intense shocks.
We were harmed in the old city. We were harmed by the earthquake. Everything is by God's will, but we sustained great harm. Residents were harmed and could not get into their houses. There is no way to enter the houses. My parents are ill at home. It is necessary to get help. We cannot continue without water or electricity.
Look at the historic Medina. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Now it's surrounded by dust and rubble and has been severely damaged. Search and rescue operations are underway. Rescuers are struggling to get through boulder-strewn roads and making their way to hard-to-reach areas. Moroccan royal forces have been mobilized to provide support. There's been an outpouring of offers of help from several countries. Speaking at the G20 Summit in New Delhi, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi extended his support.
और मोरक्को में आए भूकंप से प्रभावित लोगों के प्रति मैं अपनी हार्दिक संवेदना प्रकट करना चाहता हूं। हम प्रार्थना करते हैं कि सभी इंजर्ड लोग शीघ्र स्वस्थ हो। इस कठिन समय में पूरा विश्व समुदाय मोरक्को के साथ है और हम उन्हें हर संभव सहायता पहुंचाने के लिए तैयार हैं।
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez and French President Emmanuel Macron also offered assistance. So far, the Moroccan government has not formally asked for any help. But as Moroccans process the jarring calamity and try to pick up the pieces, they collectively hope that this was the worst of it.
We end tonight's special broadcast with a preview of what's coming tomorrow. No, not the final day of the G20. We'll cover that, of course. But India's other colossal international engagement, the Asia Cup cricket match against Pakistan. India versus Pakistan is always exciting. It's one of the most anticipated fixtures in the world of cricket. They faced each other last Saturday, but that group stage match was a washout. The rains in Sri Lanka played spoiler. So for tomorrow's match, the Asia Cup organisers have a backup in place. They've arranged for a reserve day. But that decision has drawn some criticism. Doesn't take the sheen away, though, from the upcoming clash of the two sides. Our next report brings the details.
India versus Pakistan. It's one of the world's greatest rivalries in every field, especially sport. But it takes on truly epic proportions in cricket, a sport that both countries treat like a religion. So naturally, nothing draws in the crowd like an India-Pakistan cricket match. For many, it's the highlight of a tournament featuring the two sides. These tournament fixtures are even more important for fans considering how rare India-Pakistan matches are. You see, India and Pakistan have suspended bilateral cricket ties. This has happened multiple times through the years. The last flashpoint was the 2008 Mumbai attack, when terrorists from Pakistan attacked India's financial capital. India snapped cricket ties with Pakistan again. And only once after that have the two teams played a bilateral. That was a one-day international and T20 series in December 2012. In the decades since, the arch-rivals have only met at international tournaments, like the Asia Cup. The point of this history lesson was to highlight just how important this rivalry is, which explains the strange change of rules at the Asia Cup. It explains why the fixture has been given a reserve day. Before we get to that, here's a recap of the rivalry during this tournament. India and Pakistan will face each other tomorrow in the Cup's Super 4 stage. This is the second time they'll come face-to-face in this tournament. They first squared off last Saturday in the group stage, but that match had to be abandoned. India had scored 266 runs. They were all out in 48.5 overs. But Pakistan never got the chance to take the field. It was raining heavily in Sri Lanka, too heavily for the match to continue. And so, the most anticipated fixture in the group stage ended without a conclusion. No offense meant to the other Asia Cup participants. An India-Pakistan match isn't just about ability, rankings, form. It's also about raw passion. That's why the fixture is one of the most anticipated in any international cricket tournament. And last Saturday, the rains brought many a cricket fan to tears. Tomorrow's match may be the last time the two face each other in the Asia Cup. So, the organisers have arranged for what's known as a reserve day. If the rain stops the game tomorrow, it will be continued on Monday. Now, usually, this provision only exists for the final. But mid-tournament, they brought this in for the India-Pakistan match, just for this fixture, not the other Super 4 matches. The coaches of the other teams in the Super 4, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh, have voiced their misgivings. But their cricket councils have allowed the special treatment for the India-Pakistan match. Both Sri Lankan and Bangladeshi cricket councils put out tweets. They said they've given their consent. Now, while some may argue that the reserve day gives India and Pakistan an undue advantage, it'll also give cricket fans around the world something else, a chance to see the greatest cricket showdown. The two arch-rivals bringing everything they've got and leaving it all out on the field. And the real winner being the game of cricket.
And now it's time for Vantage Charts, images that tell the story. Hong Kong is cleaning up after record rainfall led to floods. North Korea marked its founding day with a parade. Kim Jong-un attended the parade with his daughter, and tourists swelter at Lake Como as heat waves hit Italy. Finally, we are taking you back in history. On this day in 1976, China's revolutionary leader Mao Zedong died at the age of 82. He was the founder of the People's Republic of China and led the Chinese Communist Party till his death. His ideas are set out in what they call the Little Red Book that was studied by millions during China's Cultural Revolution. Also, don't go anywhere. 10 p.m. IST. Catch our full conversation with the President of Brazil, Lula da Silva, right here on First Post. Make sure you don't miss it. We're leaving you on that note. Thank you for watching. We will see you tomorrow for another special edition of Vantage. Hello and welcome to this very special interview. With me is the President of Brazil, Mr. Lula da Silva. President da Silva, welcome to Firstpost.
Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here talking with the Indian TV viewer, and I hope that we're going to have a great interview.
We look forward to it, Mr. President. How's your visit to New Delhi going so far, and how has the first day of the G20 Summit been for you?
Well, actually, this G20 is a G20 that is exceptionally very well organized. We had, I would say, a lot of work. I arrived last night, and today we had 2 sessions that were hard work, and we had some other parallel events that were also very important. We launched a commitment together with Prime Minister Modi and President Biden, with Argentina, with Indonesia, commitment to follow a biofuel policy that is very strong so that we can fight the greenhouse gas effect, so that we can diminish the use of oil and try to use biofuel. So that was very important, this initiative, this commitment that was assumed by all the presidents that participated together with Prime Minister Modi. And so I am convinced that we will come out of this meeting with some guidelines where the countries will, what would they have to do from here onwards, so that we can diminish the inequality between the peoples, inequality amongst the countries, so that the world could live in a better way, and above all, so that we can confront the climate issue with great responsibility. It's not a joke what's happening on with the climate change around the world. If someone still has doubts that the climate, nothing will happen with the climate, I can reassure you that the most certain thing that exists today is that we are lacking with responsibility when we deal with the climate change, and we're being the victim of the lack of attention of humanity. The rulers lacked responsibility in dealing in an effective way to avoid that the planet will warm up, that we will lose control of these floods, and there's nothing to do. We still have time. We have to take care of the planet. I believe that this meeting will give a very good guideline to all countries so that we can manage to put in practice a good policy so that we can take care with great care of our planet Earth, of their forests, of its water, so that we can live well.
Mr. President, it's very, very good to see a world leader like you speak so passionately about climate, and we hope to see more leaders put it at the center of their policy making. I understand that India has been also pushing for climate action that is just, that does justice to the whole world, developing and developed. We've had some 200 meetings over the past few months in 60 Indian cities. What do you make of the progress that has been made so far, and what do you make of India's agenda?
I think it was an extraordinary, the India agenda that they developed, and the promotion of 60 debates or more in different cities. In Brazil, many ministers came to these meetings. We had the health minister, we had the mines and energy minister from Brazil, we had the science and technology minister, the enormous amount, the labor minister came here, and the finance minister came to these meetings. So these hundreds of meetings that you involving thousands of people is a new way that India is teaching to us that it's not sufficient for the presidents of the countries to participate. It's necessary for us to involve the government as a whole, and that we should involve the people that should participate in the debate. We learned a lot. And since we're going to host next year the G20 in Brazil, we will take from India many teachings, and so that we can have a G20 meeting as productive as we had here in India.
One of the big headlines today is the Delhi Declaration. We understand that there is finally consensus. We've seen the draft of the declaration, and all leaders have agreed. There was a fear that the war in Ukraine might hijack the agenda. And in the statements that followed since, it was said that Brazil, South Africa and Indonesia helped forge consensus. Can you tell us a little more about the conversation that went in, and how did Brazil contribute?
Well, the G20 is a forum that was built because of the 2008 and 9 global financial crisis. From there onwards, the G20 started to discuss many economic issues, and the Bretton Woods institutions were also started to be discussed, the World Bank, the IMF, in an attempt to try to improve the functioning of these multilateral institute. That's why we didn't want here in India, we would discuss the war between Ukraine and Russia. This is not the appropriate forum for that. On the 19th of September of this month, we will have the General Assembly of the UN, and that's the place for us to discuss the war. That's the place for us to try to discuss peace. That's the place for us to call Putin and Zelensky in a negotiation table, and because no one wants war. Everybody is against war. We want peace. So it's necessary for us to establish a conversation policy so that we can try to convince the two presidents for Russia and Ukraine that the war is not the solution for anything, and that the dialogue, the diplomacy, and a table of dialogue could help much more. From the beginning, Brazil has been saying that we do not want to participate in the war efforts. Brazil wants to participate in the peace effort. We want to try to negotiate, as also India thinks like that, China thinks like that, many other countries think like Brazil, and so that's why we believe that it's very important so that the war issue should not be included in the document, in the declaration from the G20. That's very important. Otherwise, people go to war and then we lose and waste time instead of discussing the problems that involve 9 billion inhabitants, the hunger that is affecting 735 million people, unemployment of millions of people, and we stay here discussing something that is not our top priority. And so I believe that it was very important, the decision that was made not to allow that the war would come into our declaration. The declaration is very serious-minded. It's a mandatory reading for all of us that participated in the G20, and I hope that it serves as a guideline, as a roadmap, so that we can, in Rio next year, to do something even better. Now we have to start to go to actual policies. Now we're going to go to a phase that G20 doesn't have to stay anymore just discussing and philosophy. And no, we have to take commitments to make things change, to do things. The climate change issue is very serious-minded. We have to do something about it. And Brazil is taking the commitment of reaching 2030 with zero deforestation. And we have already ended hunger in Brazil once in the past. And now we have 33 million that are in hunger once again. And so we're going to end the hunger in Brazil again. And to end with hunger in Brazil, we have to create jobs. The economy has to grow. The poor has to come into the national budget of the different countries. When the government starts building its budget to know how much money the government is going to spend, they have to include the poor in that budget, in government spending. The poor has to be included in the government budget, because no one wants to include the poor. Now, in the moment that you put the poor in the budget, you start to diminish the poverty, because you know what happens when the poor receives a benefit. He receives a benefit, and he's not going to buy dollar. He's not going to keep that money. He's going to buy things. He's going to buy new clothes for his children. He's going to buy school material for the kids. So that means that the wheel of the economy starts working. This is what we're going to have to do from here onwards. We're going to have to make the economy move forward so that we can end with the inequality and with hunger in the planet Earth.
And I'm going to come back to all of these points, the very important subjects that you touched upon. But I also want to ask you, because until yesterday, the European and the G7 countries seemed intent on having their way with the language vis-a-vis Ukraine. How did you and others prevail upon them to ensure that there was consensus on the declaration?
Well, this is already a majority that is being formed within the countries. On the BRICS, for example, we didn't discuss the war during the BRICS summit meeting. We thought that there's other fora to discuss the war. And we could bring to India a debate, a discussion that has more consequence in Europe because they're involved directly in the war, and the U.S. is also directly involved in the war. But the other countries are not involved directly in the war. The other countries are involved in policy for peace, to develop a policy for peace. We have to talk about peace every day. So that's why we are already discussed with all the European heads of state and government. I discussed twice with President Biden. We do not want to discuss war. We want to discuss peace. When Putin and Zelensky are willing to discuss peace, then India will talk, Brazil will talk, China will talk, Indonesia, Argentina, and other countries will go to peace conversations. We'll talk about peace. We have to stop the war first. And then diplomacy should come in the picture so that we can see the world living in peace.
Would you say this consensus, in a way, is a win for New Delhi, and it establishes India as a bridging power in an increasingly divided world?
India will always be a power. It is a country that has a tremendous 1,000-year culture. It's a country that was already colonized, a country that managed to get its independence with the most extraordinary figure after Christ, which is Mahatma Gandhi. It's a country that has 1,400,000,000 inhabitants. It's a country that is the 6th largest economy of the world, a country that managed to build a cheap rocket and reach a part of the moon that not even the Russians managed, and the Americans managed to go to that part of the moon. So what happened here was the result of the competence of organization of the G20 that India organized as the host country. India is always a country that you have to take it very seriously, very respected country, and I will always say that because we came here and we established a strategic partnership between Brazil and India, and this partnership now needs to be improved so that the trade flow, foreign trade flow between Brazil and India should be the size of India and the size of Brazil. It should be very big because we can do that. So we have the conditions to do. So what happened here was a victory of the organization and of the respectability that we all have for India.
You had your first meeting with Prime Minister Modi in the month of May after your inauguration as the President of Brazil for a third term. What was your impression of him, and how do you see his leadership on this global platform?
The impression was very good. I had previous relations here with the former Prime Minister Singh, and it was a very good relationship with Prime Minister Singh. And the relationship with the Prime Minister Modi was extraordinary. The two times that I met him, he conveys a trust, a confidence that he's managing India with great seriousness for the good and the benefit of the Indian people. And this is of the interest of Brazil, is that we should have a relationship with a ruler that has responsibility with their people. I know that India is a complicated country because it has many religions, many different languages are spoken here. So to rule a country the size of India is much more complicated for me to govern Brazil that has 200 million inhabitants. So I believe that he has given a clear-cut demonstration, extraordinary. He was re-elected once already, and it seems that he's running again for office next year. As people talk to me, he could be re-elected again. This means that this is a recognition of the people for the work that he's developing. And I remember that India was the 15th largest economy and Brazil was the 6th largest economy. Now India is the 6th largest and Brazil is the 12th largest economy of the world. The coup d'etat that was attempted in Brazil and an extreme right rising to power made Brazil go backwards in terms of its GDP growth. Now we took office and now we're making the GDP grow again because we want Brazil to have a strong economy, a developed economy.
Yes, I do want to come to talk about Brazil's economy, but for now, the G20 agenda, India and others have been pushing for the inclusion of the Global South, and today the African Union got membership of the G20, so now it is G21. How significant is this according to you? Do you think it is going to mitigate the imbalance and will ensure just representation of developing countries on international platforms?
I have been saying that 30 years ago, India and Brazil were treated as poor countries. Problems more bigger than solutions for them. After that, Brazil started to be treated as third world country, and then we started to be treated as a developing country. And now we're part of the global south. That is to say, we decided to organize ourselves and to show that we want to grow, that we want our society should have a standard of living that is good, that should have a standard health care, and with that, education. And so the pharmaceutical industry in India is extraordinary. We want to have a partnership with them. And so there have been many investment here in science and technology. Brazil has to learn with India with that. We have to learn with India and invest more in science and technology. So what I believe is that India is a country that is rising. And I think that this is very important. As India managed to improve the standard of living of their people, the people starts to consume more. And when they consume more, they create more jobs. And when they create more jobs, they create more salaries. And when they create salaries, more consumption. And the gigantic wheel of the economy starts moving, and everybody starts to participate in the economy. So that's why I'm very optimistic with the growth of India, as was happy with the growth in China 20, 30 years ago when it happened. And when I'm happy when Brazil's economic growth makes me happy too. I was in Hiroshima, and the managing director of IMF said that Brazil would not grow this year. And then I just met her here, and I said to her, Brazil's not going to only grow, but Brazil will surprise the IMF. We're going to grow 3 times more than the forecast that the IMF thought that we would grow. So my assumption is the following. A lot of money in the hands of few means wealth concentration, means impoverishment. It means growth of the absolute misery and poverty and malnutrition, hunger. It means all that. This is a lot of money in the hands of few. Now, when you have few money in the hands of many, that means income distribution, that means more jobs, more consumption, more schools, more health care. You don't have to be an economist to reach this conclusion. You have to be a humanist. You just to think with your heart. The ruler cannot think only with his head, with his mind. He has to have feelings, think with his heart, because it depends on the government to develop the opportunities for people that did not have the chance to attend schools, that did not have the opportunity to get a good job. It is the government, the state, that should, the one that should guarantee that these people should have access to what is elementary in life, and that what is written in the Bible, it's written in the Constitution, it's written in the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights. And that's all written, and that's what the governments have to do. They have to abide to that. And so I'm very happy with the rise of India, the economic rise, and with India's participation in international multilateral fora, because it has an important role to play.
The G20 is essentially a forum to discuss economic issues, and China is the second largest economy in the world, and Chinese economy is not in a very good phase right now. China is also increasingly isolated politically. If you were the president of China, would you skip the G20 summit in New Delhi?
Well, I don't know what is the litigation that may happen between China and India. I don't know what are their conflicts. If I was the president of China, I would have come to the G20 meeting. Why? Why so? Because it's very important for us to participate in these fora, because we need to greet people, shake hands, look in the eye of the people, to have bilateral meetings and have direct conversations and discuss the interests of your country. Now, look, even China now, the way it is, it's still a country by the strength of its economy. It's the balance of the world. Brazil is not part of those that advocate a new Cold War between the U.S. and China. No, we want that the economy to be developed, that all the countries should go, create jobs. We don't want any kind of litigation or conflict. We have to understand that civil society needs harmony, hope, peace. That's what we need. We have to talk about peace and love and start, instead of talking about hate, divergence, we have to talk about something called solidarity. And this is what we're lacking now, on this heart in politics every day. So that's why we have these extreme far-right groups in many parts of the world. So I regret that President Xi Jinping didn't come. I don't know what problem, what was the reason, but I just was with him at the BRICS summit meeting in South Africa. And it was very important his participation in that summit meeting. So I'm very happy with China's growth too. And I'm very happy with the growth of any country in the world. Now, what is truly important is not only to grow. What is important is that this growth should be distributed for the people. Because if the growth is not distributed to the people, it's concentrated in the pockets of someone, or some people. So it's necessary that this growth should be distributed so that civil society should participate in the results of that growth that it helped to produce. This is the way that democracy works. Everybody wants to eat. Everybody wants to get dressed. Everybody wants to work. Everybody wants to have access to pleasure, to leisure. Everybody wants to travel. And so we're the ones that are responsible to work to make that happen. That's the only reason for which I want to be a president, is to prove that we can improve the lives of the poor people. So, look, in Brazil, I am the only president that didn't have a university degree. I only have the elementary school degree. Nevertheless, I am the president that built most universities in the history, federal institutes of education, and vocational training schools, and it was during my government that we put in more students in the university. And so, this is just to prove that when we want, we can do it. Sem dúvida. The president doesn't have to know about everything, but when he's in question, has a doubt, he consults and the organizations of civil society. There's a lot of people that have a lot of wisdom, that have expertise, that want to speak out. And so the government, I don't know if you perceive that all of us, we have one mouth to speak and 2 ears to listen. So it's necessary for us to have more capability to listen and not only speak, and maybe put in practice things that the civil society is speaking up to us. When we listen to civil society, we don't make mistakes.
That's a very interesting message. We should have the ability to listen more and speak less, you're saying. I wonder if that is a message to some leaders as well, to some countries. The U.S. is called China a spoiler. Do you agree with that term?
Well, I believe, I don't see very well this fight between the U.S. and China. I don't think it's a good thing, because it seems that this is an attempt to create a new Cold War. The experience of Cold War was not good for humanity. It was not good for the countries, the Cold War period. And so I believe that we won't have another atomic bomb, another nuclear war, but we won't have the Cold War either. Humanity needs peace. A country can only grow if it has peace, if it has investments. They can build new highways, new railroads, new buildings, new schools, new universities. But when it's in war, you don't build anything, you just destroy. And what you did at the cost, at the expense of the sacrifice of millions of people, is destroyed by a bomb. And then you have to rebuild again. And so I would enjoy that the U.S. and China should also do well, and the world should stay calm with tranquility. Everybody should work not only to build peace, but also to build the growth and the economic sustainable development. Now that this issue is coming of wind power and solar power are coming strongly now, and that people are thinking to build a new energy matrix with climate change so that we can take care of the planet because we're to avoid the greenhouse gas emissions and a low carbon agriculture. We have to be united to do all that. We have to be united. We live in this under the same house. India lives in a house. I live in another house. Biden lives in another house. Xi Jinping lives in another house. But it's the same house. It's the same world. There's no way for you to escape. If this boat goes down, shrinks, everybody will go down. And so, for God's sake, let's stop with the divergence and let's seek for consensus. Let's stop thinking about war and think about peace. Let's stop conveying hatred and convey love. And let's take care of the poor people, the working class, the working people, the ones that did not have an opportunity in their life because the government, the state did not allow them to have an opportunity. Because no one is poor because they want to be poor. No one makes an option to be poor. No one is born and says, I want to be poor when I grow up. No, everybody wants to live well. Everybody wants to have a good job. Everybody wants to study. And it is the state, the government is the one that has to guarantee to make that happen for the people. This is what I believe in. This is what guides my life. And this is what I've done under 2 terms in my previous terms in Brazil, the president. This is what I'm doing the 3rd term as president. My political preaching is for peace, for love, for development, and for the distribution of the benefits for all the population.
Mr. President, can there be peace when one player or one member of the House that you mentioned does not respect the territorial integrity of others? You mentioned balance of power. That's a term that you also used in your visit to China earlier this year, which was a high-profile visit. China is increasingly seen as an expansionist power in the region, and it has territorial disputes with practically all its neighbors. In your private conversations with the leadership, do you impress upon them the need to uphold a rules-based order?
Deixa eu lhe dizer uma coisa.
Let me say something to you. Brazil has borderline with all South American countries. We have almost 17 million square kilometers of borderline, and we have no conflict, no litigation with any country, and we don't want to have such conflict or litigation. We believe that the United Nations does not represent anymore for which it was created for. So that's why that we are advocating a change in the membership of the UN Security Council, that more countries should participate in the UN Security Council. India should participate, Germany should participate, Brazil should participate, Japan should participate, Mexico should participate, Argentina, or either Egypt or Nigeria or South Africa, because the UN Security Council doesn't represent the political geography of today, but only of 1945. And we have a UN Security Council that are the 6 permanent members that are, there's the ones that have atomic bombs, they're the ones that sell weapons, there's the countries that go to war without consulting anybody. It is true that Russia invaded Ukraine without consulting anyone, and the U.S. invaded Iraq without consulting anybody. England and France invaded Libya without consulting previously anyone. And we believe that it's possible to respect the fundamental principle of the United Nations. Brazil is 100% against the invasion of territorial integrity of any other country. Brazil is against that. Against Russia, against China, the U.S., Brazil will be against any country that puts in practice in territorial invasion of another country.
Very good to hear that. You mentioned Russia. The Russian president is not here. He did not even go for the BRICS summit. Next year, Brazil will be hosting the G20. Would you like to welcome President Putin to Brazil for the G20?
He will be invited because next year we will have the BRICS being hosted by Russia. Before the G20 in Brazil, we'll have the BRICS meeting in Russia, and I will attend the BRICS meeting in Russia next year. I believe that the Prime Minister Modi will also go to Russia, and I think that Xi Jinping will go. South Africa will attend, and Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, Egypt. Everybody's going to attend the BRICS meeting, and then I hope that they also come to Brazil's G20 meeting. Brazil, they will feel a peace environment in Brazil. So they're going to feel that in Brazil, we enjoy music, we enjoy carnival, we enjoy soccer, but we enjoy peace. And we like to treat well people. So I believe that Putin can go easily to Brazil.
You're signatories to the Rome Statute, though, and there's an arrest warrant against him.
Well, what I can say to you is that if I'm president of Brazil, and if he comes to Brazil, there's no way that he'll be arrested. No, he will not be arrested. No one is going to lack respect of Brazil. If you will arrest someone in Brazil without the authorization of the government, you are not respecting Brazil. People have to take seriously the country of Brazil and its independence.
Of course. Your government refused to supply weapons to Ukraine, and in the past you have criticized Western military aid to Ukraine, saying that this has prolonged the conflict. Would you say that the West, with its continuous military aid packages, is part of the problem in this war?
Let me tell you a short story. In 2022, it was spent $2,224 billion in weapons, in arms. If this money had been spent in education, fighting hunger, investment in social inclusion, certainly the world would be much better than with the war in Ukraine. So it's for us to use the good senses of the people, the common sense of people. If you have awareness before you go to war, if you have your senses, use all the conversation mechanisms or facilities that may exist. Have a meeting, 2 meetings, 3, 10 meetings, whatever. The only thing that you can't do is go to war. When the U.S. went to war against Iraq, I was talking with President Bush in those days on December the 10th of 2002. I was not president, but I was president-elect. And I told President Bush, President Bush, Iraq, they don't carry chemical weapons. The general director of the UN Agency for Chemical Weapons was a Brazilian ambassador. And he said, there's no chemical weapons in Iraq. And then the lie was told by the American government and by the Iraqi government that said they did carry those weapons. Iraq was lying because they wanted to sell a force that they didn't have. And the U.S. was stubborn and went to war with Iraq. Until today, the chemical weapons were not found in Iraq. The chemical weapon had led to the murder of Saddam Hussein. So you need a lot of wisdom from the human being. War is not of our interest, of the human beings. And then another severe thing that is happening are the blockades, the sanctions. For example, the blockade against Cuba is 60 years already. The embargo against Cuba and the embargo against Venezuela, the embargo against Iran. An embargo is a weapon that is worse than a bomb. Because at war, you have soldiers fighting soldiers, but in an embargo, you victimize children, women, kids that do not have nothing to do with the war. So we rulers, we need to change our behavior. I can't imagine that Cuba has a blockade, an embargo for 60 years long, and that people don't manage to survive well in the way they want to live. So I believe that the first opportunity I have with President Biden, I'm going to say to President Biden that it's necessary to stop, to penalize Cuba. Cuba is not a country that has terrorists. I've been going to Cuba for more than 30 years. I've never seen any action of the government to give incentives to the terrorists. They have to take out this charge against Cuba that it's a terrorist harboring country and get rid of the embargo to help them survive. There's no explanation. I didn't agree to the embargo when I was 50 years old. Today I have 77 years of age. And it's been all for 27 years. I don't understand why the embargo continues against Cuba, because there's no mass weapon of destruction in Cuba. So it's necessary to find other ways to do politics in the world. The planet is becoming overcrowded, and soon we will be 9 billion people. And the raw material is the same. The geographic space is the same. And so we'll have to learn to live with peace. We're going to have to learn in harmony. Otherwise, we will destroy ourselves. And the human being, I should say, is the only animal on the planet Earth that do things to cause damage to themselves. And so we need a civilizatory process to reintroduce civilization so that humanity could live in peace, in harmony, and with tranquility. That's what we need. This is what I wish for the world. This is what I wish for my country. And this is what I wish for the people that participate in the multilateral institutions. The IMF has to help people. It cannot penalize people. The World Bank has to have people and not penalize people. The poor countries. Let me give you another example. The African continent has a debt of $800 billion. You can't pay back that debt. It's unpayable. So it's necessary for us to find a way to transform this African debt in investments for infrastructure, where the countries could be lifted from poverty and grow and have the prospect of participating in the wealth of the world, having a share of the wealth of the world. It's not difficult. It's only for us to think a little bit with our heart and not only with reason.
You've spoken about, you call them the blue-eyed bankers, the IMF and the World Bank and their policies, and you're saying the sanctions are not the way to deal with the situation. Do you think that the current approach is going to precipitate an economic downturn?
All of us, we have to take responsibility. Brazil, when I was there, after almost 4 years of a disaster, where Brazil was governed by a fascist and that was only preaching hatred, and he would tell 11 lies per day. And I think that he has liability for half of the deaths that we had due to COVID-19 in Brazil, because he denied the vaccines. He said that he didn't believe in the COVID, and that if someone took a vaccine, it would become a crocodile. He would give recipes, prescriptions for medicine that had nothing to do with the COVID-19. So the world needs to get rid of these people. And the people need to have, as a rule, people that have sensitivity, people that believe in the human being, that are humanists, people that do not want the evil for anybody. And I'm not obliged to like anyone or someone. No one is obliged to like me. But what I want is that people should respect me as I am, and I should respect the people as they are. And that's what I want. Each one should have the religion that they want. Each one should be the fan of any sport team that they want, vote for whoever they want to. When the electoral process is over, We have to rule for all, govern for all. You have to govern for the rich and the poor. Now, you have to do what my mother used to do. A mother does not let one child to eat more and earn more than the other. So in government, you have to treat everyone with equal conditions with a gaze to the poor. The poorest ones are the most people that don't even want, that need more caress, more warmth, that need additional aid. That's how I think that the rulers should govern their countries.
Coming back to Ukraine, do you think now is the time for a negotiated settlement? And would you like to play mediator between President Zelensky and Putin?
No, I believe that the time has passed. I believe the two presidents still think each one is going to win the war. So when some side thinks that they're going to win, they don't want to negotiate it. And I regret all the deaths that you can't come back for life. No one will give back their lives that were lost. I regret deeply almost 8 million people that are shifted or had to move outside Ukraine, that fled and trying to live in other countries. I regret the destruction of the material goods that people themselves built. And so I believe that every day, all the time, is peacetime. And no time is wartime. No. If it's necessary, if I'm invited, if I'm called, if I have a contribution to give, I would enjoy to participate together with India, together with China, together with other countries. But it is important that the U.S. and the European Union should have the willingness to help us to build peace. I understand the speeches of each one from Europe, because Europe is very close to the war, and I can understand their speeches. And I understand the U.S. too, that it seems they have a lot of against Russia. I have nothing against anybody. I want to do well with the U.S., I want to do well with Russia, and I want to do well with India, and I want to do well with China, and I want to do well with my consciousness and with God.
Of course. You attended the BRICS summit last month, and we saw an expansion of the BRICS. There was a report, or many reports, that said that China wants to create an anti-Western bloc, and that's the direction that it was taking. I understand that some countries were not on board with that idea. You endorsed the idea of a BRICS common currency to take on or to replace the US dollar. Are you happy with the direction that this grouping is taking?
Well, first of all, I did not endorse of a common currency. Brazil proposed the idea for a long time for a need of the countries to build a currency so that they don't need the dollar. I can negotiate with India with my own currency and India with their currency. The same thing, my currency with the China's their own currency. The Europeans created the euro. Why can't we create a new currency for trade? But we'll keep our own national currencies. What we did was to allow that the finance ministers of the BRICS countries have 1 year to find a solution for this new currency. And we do not want to confront anybody with this idea. We don't want to go against the G7, because I'm also a guest at the G7. I participate in the G20, in the BRICS meetings. I participate in the IPSA, which is a group, India, Brazil, and South Africa forum, that China does not participate in the IPSA. And so we have to have the awareness that no one wants to create a bloc against another bloc. What we want is to be treated with respect and under equal terms. This is what we want, only that. And India has the right to be not only a big country in terms of population, but a great country in terms of the quality of lives of their people, of its people. Brazil too has that right. China too. The U.S. too. All of us dream that our people will reach the welfare state that Europe has achieved. We dream with a welfare state. And we know for that this is a very difficult task to reach that welfare state, because we have to find more ores, more richness in nature. And I don't know if nature has all that wealth for us to find. We cannot live in a world, possibly, where 2% of humanity has much more wealth than 50% of the poor.
I know you have to go for dinner, but I want to ask you two very quick questions. One, at the BRICS summit, there was a picture of you along with the Indian Prime Minister that went viral. You were looking at a newspaper, and we were all very curious to know what was the conversation that you were having at that time.
I was congratulating the Prime Minister Modi for the conquest of reaching the space with a rocket, cheap rocket, and to manage to reach a place where 4 days before that the Russians failed to reach the moon. So I think it was an extraordinary achievement with science and technology for India. So I was congratulating the Prime Minister, and he was very proud of the achievement.
And my final question, a lot of people have seen you making speeches at global forums. We've heard about your views on politics, your views on climate change, economy, but not many people know that you also watch movies from India. Do you want to tell our audience about the movie that you liked?
Yes. The last film that I watched from India is a film called Revolt, Rebellion and Revolution. RRR. It's a 3-hour feature film, and it has very funny scenes. There is beautiful dance in the film, and there is a critique, a deep critique to the British control over India and conquering India. Sincerely, I believe that this film should have been a box office here in India, and I believe that it should be making success around the world, because everybody that talks to me, the first thing that I say is, have you watched the 3R film? Revolt, Rebellion and Revolution. And so many times we see that the Indian film, and people don't even know that India has good movies, a good movie industry. Many times people are not aware of that movie industry, that they have good films from India. So sincerely, I enjoyed very much this film from India. The political side, I enjoyed also the dance, the joy that was shown in the film, even when the critique is done in a very humor. The critique is perfect, even using humor. So I congratulate to the directors of this film, to the artists, because it enchanted me.
Well, India has a fantastic film industry, and thank you. Through you, I'm sure the audience across the world will also know about it a little more. Thank you, Mr. President, for your time and for your thoughts and for answering all the questions that we put to you.
Thank you, Palki. Thank you very much. And I hope that the people from India that will watch your show forgive me for speaking too much.